Welcome to Mental Health at Work COVID-19, an event that is organised and hosted by the New South Wales Mental Health Commission this afternoon. Thank you so much to the team for bringing us all together for the next hour and a half. My name is Natasha Mitchell. I'm thrilled to be here facilitating today. I'm an ABC Radio National science journalist and presenter with a really big focus, as some of you might know over the years, on supporting conversations about our mental health, about the state of our minds, about our well-being. We are, I'd like to acknowledge, on Aboriginal land. Where I am, here in lockdown Melbourne, is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would really like to acknowledge and give thanks to their leaders and all Aboriginal leaders in mental health for helping us all understand the intergenerational impacts of colonisation on mental health, but also the power of post-traumatic growth and healing. And a big shout out and appreciation from me to all of you joining us with expertise and leadership that comes from your lived experience of mental health issues. Now, what's ahead in this event? We have two very strong panels. I'm very excited about these two panels. Practical, real, useful, informed by lived experience. And I also want to involve you throughout the session. So you have the opportunity to post questions to our panellists. And so get thinking, get posting. I've got a screen here. I'm going to be keeping an eye on them and juggling the panel and your questions at the same time. We want to make this as useful and as interactive as possible. We're also going to weave in a couple of short videos from excellent speakers as well on the themes that we're discussing today. And what we're discussing is mental health at work. So we know, all of us individually in our lives right now, that our individual and our collective resilience and our mental health is being tested, isn't it? This pandemic has turned our lives upside down in ways that we never imagined, we never anticipated just back in January. Who would have thought that 2020 would deliver us all this? And then there were the bushfires as well before that, which were a very sobering and confronting experience. And some of you might be joining now from bushfire-affected communities. Some of you may have lost your jobs in this pandemic. Some of you may have lost hours. Some of you might be in an industry that is on pause at the moment, and that has all sorts of implications for our mental health. Some of you, like me, are working from home, lots of complications involved with that, also a sense of isolation for many of us, and a sense of insecurity, being removed from our colleagues and our work environments. More than ever before, employers, that's many of us joining this session today, and employees are contacting Beyond Blue and Lifeline, seeking support at a time of difficulty and crisis. And more than ever before, employers and workplaces really need to know how to understand and support the mental health challenges of their staff. So, work, we know, matters to our mental health. It connects us to people, it connects us to a sense of purpose, and it connects us to a pay packet, which is really important. But also our mental health at work matters, doesn't it? And we can't just remove our entire lives, strip ourselves bare of everything that's going on in our lives every time we walk into our work environment. We bring all of ourselves to our work. And so if we're dealing with recurring issues of mental illness or mental ill health, we bring that to work too. So what needs to happen to better support us, to support you? What do workplaces and employers need to do that important work and to get the best out of their workforce as they struggle sometimes too? So before our first live panel today, which will bring together a fantastic trio, all who bring their lived experience to their work, I'd like to introduce now via video the New South Wales Mental Health Commissioner, Catherine Lowry, She has some words for us, and I'll rejoin you just after that.
Hello, my name is Catherine Lowry and I'm the New South Wales Mental Health Commissioner. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge country, and I'm working from the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations land. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend those to Aboriginal people joining us today in this webinar. I also would like to acknowledge lived experience of people experiencing mental health issues and those who offer them hope and support. Our aim at the Commission is to advocate for better mental health and wellbeing for everyone. Supporting and encouraging mentally healthy workplaces is a big part of that. We know that 1/3 of our life is spent at work. For some of us, our identity and many of our life experiences relate to work. So therefore, we also know that work environments are major determinants of health and wellbeing. The cultures, practices, programs and policies of all our workplaces should reflect this. We all have the right to work and to be well at work. Ensuring that workplaces promote mental health and wellbeing has the potential to generate benefits, including economic ones, for individuals, government, business and the community. The theme for Mental Health Month this October is Tune In. At the Commission, we are tuning in to lived experience. That is, tuning into people who have experienced mental health issues in their lives and may continue to do so, and also tuning into those who've experience of caring and supporting someone on their mental health journey and recovery. So today, we have brought together experts, some with their own lived experience, who can share with us their thoughts on how we can tune in to stigma in the workplace as it relates to mental health and how we can better support people to thrive at work, to return to work and remain at work. Fewer areas offer more promise in boosting productivity than when addressing the mental health of our labour force and creating workplaces that promote wellbeing. The evidence for this is strong. The Productivity Commission estimated a loss of productivity and reduced participation in the workforce due to mental ill health and suicide in 1 year alone in 2018-19 was estimated between $10 billion and $18 billion. So the power of employment to change the course of lives is enormous, and the opportunity to improve outcomes is equally as enormous. In my role as Commissioner, I get to speak with many people who have so many different experiences from across New South Wales. One theme that I've heard consistently through our consultations is inclusive power of having meaningful work. For people with lived experience of mental health issues, returning to work is a hugely important part of their recovery journey. Work offers purpose, social connection, structure and independence. When you think about it, those are aspects of our life that we all need to live well. Importantly, we also recognise that many people have lost their jobs or have reduced hours due to the impacts from COVID-19, but also due to the impacts of the recent bushfires and other disasters. These times are challenging for us all, but the lack of work and financial stress puts added pressures on people. And so we'll be sharing information about resources and supports that you can access if you need these types of supports. So thank you for joining us in this webinar. I hope you find it informative and instructive so that we can all work together to improve the working lives of so many in our community and for ourselves as well.
And thank you to Catherine Lowry, the New South Wales Mental Health Commissioner, and of course the New South Wales Mental Health Commission are our hosts today of this Mental Health in the Workplace event. And if you're just joining us, my name is Natasha Mitchell, your facilitator for the next hour and a half. Now, I also want to let you know that the New South Wales Mental Health Commission will be sharing details of resources and supports for employees and employers on the Commission's website at the end of the event. So we come to our first panel discussion on dealing with stigma in the workplace. And I think all of us who have experienced stigma, we know that it can be unpleasant, sometimes deeply unpleasant, sometimes frightening. It can make us fearful of seeking help when we are struggling. It can exacerbate our mental ill health. It can also block us, can't it, from achieving our full potential or from others recognising our potential at work. It's just bad all round. So what we're about here is understanding it better so that we can challenge it, so that we can confront our own stigmatising behaviours sometimes as well, but also how, if we're struggling with someone targeting stigma at us, what can we do to support ourselves to, I guess, manage stigma in a workplace when it comes to mental health. Our panellists all have lived experience of mental illness, so they are experts on this issue. We'd love to receive your questions throughout, so please do get them posting now. We want your involvement, and it's just easy to do. Just post your questions and I'll be keeping an eye on them here and integrating them. So joining us together from a studio in Sydney, which I have to say from lockdown Melbourne is extremely surreal, Tim Heffernan is New South Wales Deputy Mental Health Commissioner and a dedicated and passionate mental health peer worker, leader and peer coordinator with Coordinaire of the South Eastern New South Wales Primary Health Network. He's also an award-winning poet. And if you're new to the idea of peer work means skilled people with their own experience of mental illness and recovery supporting others. So it's a peer-to-peer dynamic. We also have Luke McGrath with us. He has facilitated multiple anxiety support groups with Way Ahead as a volunteer over recent years. He created and runs a global Facebook support group for gay men living with anxiety and depression, and he has a diploma in counselling. He brings his own experience of anxiety and depression to his volunteer roles in really powerful ways. Looking forward to hearing from Luke. Camille Wilson is with us. She's a member of the Workplace Lived Experience Reference Group for the State Insurance Regulatory Authority. She is a speaker and advisor on workplace mental health, partly prompted by her own experiences, which we'll hear something about. And she's founder and director of a group called Grow Together Now, which works closely with organisations and workplaces. And if you're managing a workplace, you may well have worked with Camille before too. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you.
Now, I'm wondering if I get to see you on the screen during this. I'm not sure. Maybe the organiser. Let me know. I can't see you at all. Oh, there you are. Hey, okay. Welcome. It's so great that you've come together. It must feel quite surreal coming into a space with people wearing masks around you, but here we are. And I guess this is the reality we're dealing with now, isn't it? Here I am remotely facilitating a conversation with you. You're at work. I'm at work. This is the new dynamic, and I'm interested in each of your impressions, just briefly, what you think COVID-19 means for our mental health and at work. Camille, some thoughts from you.
Yeah, so I guess I have had a lot of conversations in the past 6 months, which I'm sure we've all had. At first, I thought they didn't like me sitting 1.5 metres away, and I realised we're in COVID times. But yeah, I think we've had this conversation a lot, and anyone who works in mental health really has had this conversation in numerous levels. And I think what we're working with at the moment is it's so much that our roles in some capacity haven't changed. We are working in the same kind of positions, and they might have shifted a bit by having to be agile in this space. But really what we're doing, we're actually working the same roles in depleted levels of energy, from working from home to having your kids at home, whatever it might be. I think the ability for us to actually give as much as we did before COVID is actually really limiting for us, and it's really challenging to consistently put yourself out there when you are challenged at home, or you're challenged in your uncertainty of your future, or you have finance worries, whatever it might be for you as an individual. And I think that's the crux of it. It's that we're really depleted of energy in a time where we need actually more energy than ever.
You have so nailed so many issues for us to explore there, I think, because part of it then is how do you explain that? How do you articulate that to your employers, for example? And we're all desperate to hang on to our work at the moment for all the obvious reasons. Tim, what about you? What are your thoughts about the present moment and the challenges for this conversation we're having about mental health at work?
Well, in the present moment, I think, it's a double-edged thing. I think there are lots of potential drawbacks in what we're doing, but I really like to focus on the positives that we can learn as workplaces, as individuals, as communities, as societies about COVID. I think initially when COVID came through and we're in the initial lockdown, I was hearing lots of children in the streets, and I was thinking about how families were spending a lot of time together, all that time to bond a bit more. That's perhaps lost its charm over time for people working at home with kids who want you to help with their homework. Thankfully, my girls are a little bit older than that, but I think there are people who have been affected and have lost their work. There are people who have had to make huge adjustments. But I do think we're moving into a new way of working. It's a blended work from home, work from the office, all those sorts of things. But it's also a new way of looking at society, how we distribute work, how we distribute the money and opportunities that we have. So I think we are learning a lot. So it's about how we translate that over the next 12 months. I think is really important, Natasha.
It's important that you raise there are challenges, but from the conversations that I've had, people have had an ability, if they have managed to keep their work, to slow down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And to not rush around. They get to spend more time with their partners and their children. Now that has other issues as well, but there are some positives to that could be beneficial for mental health.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll be looking at things like, even the length of the working week, for instance. Do we have to have 5 days? Is this teaching us we can get a lot more done in less time at home? Can we utilise that work home space better than we have traditionally? So, it's as I said, I think it's got those positive possibilities if we explore them.
And I think it's forced companies that were resistant to this kind of stuff beforehand. So you think of flexibility and people who work from home. I have many people in my life who have worked for industries or organisations that have not allowed working from home as an option. And with COVID, they were forced to have that option. And it's really challenged those, I think, traditional ways of thinking of how work is and how it works and how it will be in the future. And I think it has huge implications on the future of work, and hopefully it does have a huge positive impact for how we have it about mental health at the workplace with that conversation of future of work and flexible working.
And then the question is, how do we stay connected? How do we, I'm imagining for managers at the moment, how do you stay connected with the wellbeing of your workforce and with your own wellbeing while navigating this whole new regime? Luke McGrath, what are your thoughts about the present moment and what it might mean for us and our mental health in the context of us as workers as well?
I think right now, I tend to be the glass half full or not, if not full kind of person, and look at more of the positives that have come from it. Whilst it's been very challenging for so many people, and in many cases sad stories for people that may have lost their jobs and things like that, the awareness is probably the biggest it's probably ever has been, even globally, to know the importance of it. And we were talking a little bit earlier just about the awareness of it, but I think it's also clarifying what mental health is in these work environments. And you can put up the posters, you can say that you're doing this and that, but to actually really have a closer look at the individual impacts on these things, are probably having more of the discussions.
Yeah.
And the other huge thing is that we're actually hugely fortunate in the sense of, imagine if this happened 20 or 30 years ago, how working from home would be. At least we have video conferencing and we have all these ways to still stay connected more than ever. So as far as, like you said, what's a way of keeping that connection to each other? We do have more of the tools than ever. So that's quite a fortunate thing.
And I think it's that lesson, the kind of next stage will be the sustainability of that.
Yeah.
And I think, as you said, Natasha, you kind of nailed it on the head. I think a big question I get asked a lot at the moment from leadership is, how do I stay connected? How do I actually notice mental health now that I have the challenges? It was hard enough face-to-face, let alone how do I do it when someone is virtual? And it is easy to hide away. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for sustainability as well as that. Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely going to be the coming out from isolation and lockdowns. That's going to be, I think, the next big challenge.
Let's come to how we might have some of those conversations, because this is what this is about too. How do you have conversations about wellbeing in the workplace in a way that doesn't expose you to being stigmatised or be fearful of whether you'll be constrained somehow by revealing your vulnerabilities to your manager, or vice versa. If you're a manager, how do you initiate those conversations without invading someone's privacy, for example, or kind of stepping over the line into someone's private life? Hey, I'm aware that many of you have joined today, and I can see the attendees list there. So thank you so much for being part of this event with us. Now, to really be part of the event, I want to see some of you posting questions now so that I can integrate them into our conversation as we go. So I'm looking forward to you posting questions about what you're hearing now. We'd love to have your participation that way. Tim Heffernan, COVID-19 did present major challenges for you, for your mental health. And so you've had an interesting few months, haven't you? And as part of that interesting few months, actually getting back to work was vital. And I'd just like to connect on that, because I'd love you to illustrate why work does matter, why it's important that we stay connected to workplaces if we are able to when we have mental health challenges.
Yeah, it's a good question, Natasha. Thank you. I first became unwell with my mental health condition, mental illness, how you want to frame it, when I was 23, teaching a high school in Albury, and moved into a delusional psychosis and ended up in hospital a few times. And this year, but over time, work's always been important, so I've always tried to resume work as quickly as possible. So despite having a diagnosis, I'll say, of bipolar 1 mood disorder, I've had a 20-year teacher career, have a relationship we're coming up to our 30th anniversary. We've got beautiful children and stuff, all those normal things. And I think, for me, this year particularly was one where COVID was a very seductive place, where I mentioned before about how all those good things we were seeing in the streets, people doing more walking, being out with families and all that sort of thing. And I managed to weave up a delusional belief system around, which I tend to do when I become unwell, around moving into sort of the rapture and paradise and all that, and ended up in a mental health hospital for a couple of weeks. So, which was something I probably needed. I did need at the time, and it's important, I think, when it gets too much to move into to reach out. But what was important to me too was then, with a very supportive workplace with the Primary Health Network down at South Eastern New South Wales, Coordinator, and the Commission was able to resume roles very quickly. Recovery is a process that can take a long time, and I think all workplaces should consider that, idea of, do you need people to be perfectly recovered from a mental health issue, or do you support them back into work as quickly as you can so you don't have that gap in their work life? Because sometimes those gaps are where the disconnections occur, and it's so much harder to get back into things. So I've been back at work. I had Easter in hospital, and since then it's been fine. It's been not without anxieties and not without issues, but as a worker, as a parent, as a husband, I think those roles are critically important. I think the reality of mental illness, and this is about stigma too, is that stigma comes from an ignorance, from not fully having the full picture of what people are, who people are. sort of framing mental illness in stereotypes that are outdated and wrong.
Outdated and wrong, yeah, and so constricting. It means then we can never have open conversations if we have the stigma attached to what is a universal experience. Let's face it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just want to get a sense from you what your workplace did that you felt supported you in that at that time where you had to transition into hospital, take leave from work, but then at what point do you then reach back into the workplace and say, hey, how are we going to navigate this?
Yeah, I think that I've got an excellent manager who came in and supported that move into hospital and the move back into the workplace. And in workplaces, that my privacy was always respected unless I chose to disclose to people where I had been or what was happening. Most people wouldn't have known. But simple things like checking in and seeing how you're going and making sure things are good, offering reduced hours for a while, so being able to come back on, 3 days instead of 4, and then gradually moving back into 4. I work 4 days with the PHN, and but really mostly it's about just like this is just a thing that happens. So let's move through it and get on with life. And I'm who I am, and that's part of me, and it's not going to change. And we just go on and resume those roles. It's like that.
Luke McGrath, 4 years ago, thanks, Tim, very much for that. And I think that's very useful for people to hear what happened this year and then how it was navigated by yourself and your work. Luke McGrath, 4 years ago, you went through a particularly rough patch in your life too, a relationship breakdown, and that brought ahead really major serious anxiety and lots of confrontations for you about your mental health. What did that mean for you at the time in terms of your work situation and how you were feeling in the world?
It was an interesting time. I mean, for the fact that when it happened, I was only a few weeks into a full-time role. Fortunately, as bad as everything was at that time, and I was fortunate enough to have my mother come and help me at that time, I was able to get back into a casual role in retail. So, and having that switch, there was the importance of still getting back into working, which was still important when you do have a breakdown. For me, certainly, it's still a sense of normality of when you're able to go back and do that, because if you slip too far away from everyday life, it's hard to kind of get back to that. And fortunately, my manager at the time was aware of anxiety and the impacts on that and was open and understanding for what I needed. So that made a huge difference. And being able to have individuals like that in the workplace, especially in a managerial capacity, it's not always that common, or they might try to do their best, but they're not always as knowledgeable, and be able to have those conversations aren't as free-flowing and as understanding as what we might need at the time. Sometimes a little bit too cookie-cuttery, a little bit too rigid, and it's more awkward than anything. But to have someone that just basically says,
so sort of following a script.
Yeah, exactly. But to basically pretty much say, I understand this is happening or has happened in my life, and just let me know what you need. Like having that kind of invitation and awareness made a huge difference as far as trying to get back into work, because not every day was a good day. Back at those times, it was very hard to know what the next day is really going to have, especially for that first 2 months or so. So to know that, and to know that he knew that and my team knew that, that was a huge plus. Yeah.
And the generosity in that transaction, that interaction of a manager who says, I've had this experience, or a loved one has had this experience, I understand the language of anxiety,
Yeah.
The power of that letting down a little bit of those barriers to say, to have empathy and compassion without judgment.
It can be quite life-changing and in moments that you don't forget to have that sort of understanding, even if you don't have the actual experiences in your life, but to at least have that kind of outlook that you're open to it. Like, you tell me what it's about, you tell me what you need, and giving that as well, because not everyone has the same. Really, we have our own experiences along the way, so no one is ever really going to have the same experience. So to know that someone is open to listening, understanding, and learning about it, that's huge.
I think you touched on a really, really valid point there around this word of learning. I think in mental health, we get caught in this rabbit hole of assuming we have to know everything, right? And a leader might come to you going, but I don't know the answers, I don't know how to fix this situation, or even an employee doesn't know how to quite say it, or how to put the word to a diagnosis, how do I share this in a safe way? And I think if we all go into this experience in mental health in the workplace currently, if we're still very much at the forefront looking at research, but we're still very much in the early stages of anything in the workplace or mental health and the two together. So I think we come from a learning mindset to really consider how can we learn if we have the openness to actually discover something. I think that could be the shift in mindset we need when we have conversations in mental health. And being open and honest when you say to someone, I don't actually haven't experienced that before. And that's okay, but I want to be here for you for whatever you're going through right now, and I want you to help me learn.
And the huge thing is that as much as there can be a great relation when you come together for, say, like a support group, and that you're in a room with other people with anxiety, but each and every person in that room has a different experience. You can only know so much and appreciate so much about that kind of diagnosis or that mental issue that the individual has, but they're on their own little path. So what's going to work for that person is going to work for the next. What kind of reaction or trigger is going to be different from that person to the next, and how they handle it. So even if you were to kind of educate yourself, you can only learn so much. Yeah. You just got to be open.
This is where I guess people feel that employers can feel that it's quite complicated to even start these conversations. I mean, we have enough of a struggle having these conversations in our own lives with our family members and, whoever else it might be, let alone in our workplaces where we kind of have to put on a front, or we feel that we have to put on a front. I'm going to weave in some questions now as I come to you, Camille, and then we'll open it out because there's some fantastic questions coming in.
Can I just quickly say?
Yeah.
Just as far as the complexity, I think it's just a bit of a human condition that we make things more complex than they actually are. So as far as like people feeling that way, usually it's just a matter of, that's the whole point of having like the Are You OK Day in the organisation like that. It's just that simple kind of questioning and being open. So trying not to scare ourselves off with that complexity of like, oh, really? Yeah. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? How do we make things a little more simple and a little less stressful?
Yes.
Great questions coming in. Nellie asks, I was terminated from my first role in my field of expertise, communications, because my panic attacks became regular, but my employer blamed it on my performance when this wasn't the case. So since then, I've been afraid of opening up about my anxiety in fear of losing my job. Do you have any advice on this situation for when I apply for new roles in the future? Fantastic question, Nellie. And I just want to add to that. Ali asks, what do you do if you've gone to your manager and told them after a particular incident that it affected you and they didn't respond? What do you do if you're struggling at work and at home because now the lines between work and home have become blurred and you need to essentially choose between preserving your mental health and preserving your livelihood, keeping your job? There's some related themes there. And Camille, I want to come to you because I think you're in an interesting position of having seen it from both angles. You worked in an HR role, corporate HR role for many years, and then you also had an experience of anxiety and had to have a conversation with HR about your own situation. So do you have insights from that experience and seeing the gaps?
Yeah, there's so much in those questions. Like I could go on. My brain is reeling right now. And I think as a first point, I just wanted to actually just say thank you for sharing to both my panelists for sharing their bits and pieces of their story. It's actually quite humbling to sit next to these incredible people to hear stories, because I think the wealth of knowledge in mental health, of lived experience, is just something to be acknowledged. And on that question, I understand completely. I had panic attacks on a daily basis at one point in time, and I had them for 10 months. And for a long time, I convinced myself that I didn't need to speak up and that I was going to be okay and that no one needed to know. And what I would do is I'd avoid people in the agile workforce. Like we worked in hot desking at the time. I worked a number of years ago now. And I would just avoid people because I didn't want to speak up. I didn't want to tell them the truth. And I think bad experiences, unfortunately for me, actually, I didn't have a bad experience, but it was a self-stigma of what people would think of me if I actually was honest about the fact that I had panic attacks. Because I couldn't even figure them out myself. I couldn't even figure out what this thing was happening. I denied that it was mental health for a good 6 months until I was forced to kind of face it was. So, I've definitely seen the harsh reality, and the reason I see a lot of gaps is because I have seen a lot of bad stuff in HR, which is why I'm so passionate about it. And not even HR, sorry. I've seen stigmatisation happen in the workplace. And I think as part of the reference group under the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, we actually work around this idea of disclosure. So what does disclosure mean? How does it work? What should you do? And I think at first I went into it thinking you should always disclose. That was my thoughts. I thought we should encourage people to always disclose. But then someone challenged me on that and said, actually, it should be a conscious decision about what you should do, because there are sometimes risks, there are sometimes consequences. And as much as right now in the current state of mind, we don't want to say that, we don't want it to be the case, that's the reality. And I'm kind of giving an honest answer because I don't want people to think that this
that's fantastic.
Yeah, unicorns and rainbows, because it's not. It is a conscious decision.
No, it's not. And you don't know where people are at. You don't know where managers are at in their own trajectory of understanding what stigma is and how it manifests.
Yeah, I think it manifests as discrimination, and we have to call out discrimination in workplaces when it happens. I agree that currently it's not safe to disclose all the time, but over time that should get better. I think I've worked in health for the last 12 years, disability before that, education, but I think one of the most stigmatised health is really bad. It's dangerous for some health professions to disclose. Professionally, it can be the end of a career for people, and there's no sense in that. This is still caught back in those untruths that people are believing about mental health. But at this time, I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's about having those conversations, and whilst you don't necessarily want to expose everything about what you're living with, it's knowing your limitations still. So if you're prone to, for example, like panic attacks, knowing the kind of things that might be triggering for you and that you might need that time out, and kind of expressing that to your team or to your manager or your boss that these are the limitations, or this is the kind of work environment or work conditions I need to be around.
Yeah.
And then allowing yourself in that time too to bring out that awareness, because you're an individual living with that. So maybe it's more about having that conversation about mental health, and then along that conversation being able to say, actually, I have this and that. So once they can kind of understand and grasp it a bit more, then you can lean more into saying, this is my personal experience.
Interesting though, isn't it? Because you also want to accentuate your strengths in that moment as well, so that people don't stigmatise the fact that you might have panic attacks doesn't mean that you have all these other capabilities. And in fact, the flip side of anxiety is often, a great sense of motivation to do well, I just want to throw into the mix a question from Anna. Where is the line drawn between an employer's duty of care regarding mental health issues and the employee's individual responsibility? And I think a lot of people really wrestle with this. How much should I ask? How much should I tell? What should I do? Is this a performance management issue? Lots of confusion. Any thoughts on that one?
It's a very exciting topic.
I know.
I think, just very quickly, I think it needs to be purpose-driven in terms of you need to know what you want to actually as an outcome. And I think, at the end of the day, no one rule is going to be fit for everyone. One person might not want to disclose for more reasons than just the fact that the workplace might not support them. I think for me, I didn't want anyone to know my most recent workplace sometimes, because I didn't want myself to come with that personal story of mine, that I didn't want to label myself, because I wanted to exist outside my anxiety disorder. And I wanted that escape from myself, my own recovery. And so I think we got to kind of move away from this one rule and actually go, what's the purpose of opening up? What was the purpose of disclosing, and what do I want to achieve as an outcome of my workplace, whether that's accommodations, whether that's some support in taking time off, whether that's getting some more camaraderie support. It very much has to come back down to what are we trying to achieve by having this conversation and really having more of that relationship-based, outcome-focused, purpose-driven kind of piece of work, I think.
I think it's really interesting. I'm currently in 2 roles that require as part of the job description disclosure. So with the Primary Health Network and with the Mental Health Commission, both are designated lived experience roles. And I'm working in a field with mental health peer workforce or lived experience workforce, where people are working in quite complex and difficult jobs, having disclosed their mental health past and recovery. And I think this is an incredibly powerful way of changing that stigma and discrimination, because when people see how important those people are, those peer workers in their communities, in the work that they do, people can see the strength, and it's there out there. There's no. People still have to selectively tell their story, and you don't tell your whole story all the time. But it's just wonderful to see people who are proud of who they are and wanting to share and help people on their journey to recovery as well. And we were talking about complexity before. Peer work is simple. It's just not doing to people. It's being with people as they're recovering and walking with them as they navigate their way back to their personal recovery. So, that's...
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from one of our panellists later on who have integrated a kind of peer work approach into their workplace, their corporate workplace, which is interesting.
I was just quickly
we've only got a couple of more minutes. Go on, sorry.
I was just really quickly going to say, I think the most important thing is an open door. It's just being open to have those discussions from management to employee. I think that's the most important thing. You can't go anywhere or do anything until you at least have that open door. And a lot of it's going to be learning as you go, respecting boundaries and just having an open door.
And perhaps also seeking external support,
Absolutely.
Because I don't think we all have the expertise to
We need
navigate these conversations. Stephanie has asked, I'd love to hear specific examples of behaviours and actions of a workplace where managers have responded positively to mental health needs, or specific examples of where the response has been really negative. I think we've explored some of those in this conversation. Natalie writes, the panel has spoken about the quality of being open to learning. Luke, you and your open door. What other character qualities can we all develop as colleagues, because co-workers are important here too in the stigma conversation, and as managers to encourage someone experiencing distress to feel comfortable to open up? And, yeah, I think they're really questions, that last one particularly. Where do we start? What might it be? Is it sufficient to have an Are you okay day with cupcakes? I don't think so.
No, it's not. It's about being there and being with the person. It's about listening. A lot of it's about compassion. You don't have to put yourself in the other person's shoes or things like that, but it's really about being constant, being with the person in their distress, and being there as they move away from that and forward from that distress.
Yeah, I think the best experience I've had when it came to my mental health was when I came into the office and I hadn't disclosed yet at the workplace that I had an anxiety disorder, and I was crying and I was trying to pull it together and tell everyone I was fine, as we usually do, guys. And then this lovely lady came to me. I didn't know her, and someone had asked her to meet me that morning. And she sat me down, and she didn't pull out a mental health policy or pull out her mental health first aid certificate or tell me she was anything, but she said, I don't know exactly what you're going through right now, and I don't know if I ever will be able to understand until maybe one day I go through that. But what I can do is I can be here for you. If you need to go, at the time I was presenting, like if you want to go and present, I'll be in the audience. And all you have to do is give me the eyes and I'll be there to kind of help you out. And that moment was the pinnacle of what it meant to me, what mental health in the workplace means.
Absolutely. It can be the hugest turning point.
It takes one person.
Absolutely.
It does just take sometimes one person, doesn't it, to just say, I see you. I sense that you're struggling. and I'm available.
And it's not always about
That's
the
all
doing.
it takes.
It's even just being there silently and knowing that they're there and they're by your side in some capacity. Absolutely.
Luke, you have turned your experience of anxiety into a whole sort of suite of volunteer work, both with the Facebook group you run with, global participants from the gay male community around the world, gay, bi, trans community, and also in the anxiety groups, support groups that you run. And I wonder what turning your lived experience into a source of insight for expertise to share with others in the way that Tim does too through his peer work has done for you in your understanding of your own anxiety.
Yeah, it's been very valuable, and I found being able to volunteer within mental health in any capacity has been very valuable to me, both in exploring my own mental health and then seeing what other people are going through as well. I'd highly recommend anyone that is experiencing mental health issues to volunteer if they can, or to have those discussions with other people as much as possible, because it's very rewarding. But getting out there, and it was such a great way. I volunteered so much, so it was a great way to not necessarily go back into workforce in a paid job, but to still have a place to go to, every other day and things like that. Yeah, absolutely getting purpose. And then also in an environment with other people that can understand. That was such a great thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding. I mean, yeah. And also that the power of connection. So work takes many forms, voluntary, paid or otherwise. We are nearly out of time. Go on.
I was just going to say, and doing the online group that I've done as well, whilst it's Facebook based, and I want to consider expanding that further, having that link towards people from different cultures and different experiences. That's hugely rewarding. And also to see where exactly you are in your life and going, wow, okay, there's a lot happening out there in the world. Having that broader view of the situations that people go through.
Any final thoughts from Camille or Tim?
I think Luke's nailed it. Like, I think it is about reconnecting through volunteering, about whatever gets you out that door after you've had that experience of a mental health crisis, because it is an isolating experience. You've been in that space, and sometimes the biggest thing is walking out that door, the next day walking a little bit further, and the next day walking in a different direction.
Absolutely, as long as it's going forward.
I think that's just taking the first step.
Yeah.
So if anyone's watching today from 3 people who have lived experience, just take the first step, because I'm sure we can all sit here and be testament to the fact that it matters. And
yeah, absolutely. Don't have to do it all in one day, but as long as you've got a forward momentum. It doesn't matter the speed, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there, but as long as you're working on that forward momentum, that's the most important thing.
And sometimes you'll take a few steps back as well.
Yeah, don't worry, I took
Turn it into a
back.
dance. Yeah, a dance.
Absolutely.
I love that so much.
One giant leap forward, one giant leap back. I just want to round off the conversation with this lovely comment from Giselle. Not a question, but really great points about disclosure, intent, etc. from the group. I'm attending this in preparation for my workplace mental health first aid program. Great supplement to the trainings and readings I'm doing. Thanks, Giselle. And a big hearty thanks to Tim Heffernan, Luke McGrath and Camille Wilson. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and lived experiences, but also expertise for this panel today on stigma. Really great to see you too. Fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, you are joining the Workplace Mental Health event brought to you by the National Mental Health Commission. If you've just joined us, my name is Natasha Mitchell. We're experiencing some fantastic panel discussions today, really discussing at this time of COVID-19, after the bushfires, what are the unique challenges that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of our mental health? But also, what does that mean for our work selves? Have we perhaps lost our job? Have we perhaps had to start working from home and we feel a sort of loss of connectivity, physical connectivity to our work environment and to our colleagues? There are pros and cons, as we've acknowledged. Well, now we have a little video for you, and then I'll join you again for another panel, this time with people who are running programs inside workplaces or to support workplaces. joining us now via a video to reflect on stigma in the workplace, because she's just been involved in driving and releasing a massive Sane Australia report, the National Stigma Report Card. It was released last week. I was involved in its launch, and it is a magnificently interesting document. I highly commend it to you. With us now is Dr. Michelle Blanchard. She's Deputy CEO of Sane Australia and the founding director of Sane's Anne Deveson Research Centre. Over to you, Michelle.
Stigma is the attitudes that we hold towards somebody because of their experience of a mental health issue. Often we think that stigma is just about people's public attitudes, but stigma actually has a couple of different components. So stigma can be self-stigma, which is the way that we feel about ourselves when we might be experiencing a mental health problem. Public stigma, which is the way that the wider community views people who might be experiencing a mental health problem. And then what we call institutional or structural stigma, which is where the systems and processes by which our community functions and the institutions in it are in and of themselves stigmatising or discriminatory towards people who might be experiencing a mental health problem. So it's really important to think about all of those different aspects of stigma if we're going to create a community that is completely free from stigma and discrimination. Recognising stigma can sometimes be really difficult because sometimes the behaviours that are stigmatising, so we often talk about that in terms of discrimination, are actually not as obvious. So there's more obvious forms. So, using derogatory language towards people who might be experiencing a mental health problem, or actively preventing people from being able to participate. But actually some of the forms of stigma that are more difficult for us to shift are the ones that are just below the surface. And they're the kinds of things that can often be barriers for people in being able to participate really fully in their community. So for example, in a workplace, it might be a policy that doesn't provide for flexible work. It may be something that then makes it difficult for people who might be experiencing a mental health problem and need a little bit of flexibility, whether that's in terms of the times of day that they work or the location that they work from. Those kinds of things play out in a stigmatising way. So there's lots of things that we can do about stigma. I think as individuals, we can think about the way that we support those in our community who are experiencing mental health problems. And that really comes down to treating people with care and treating people with compassion. But I think there are also other things that we can do. We can call out stigma and discrimination where we see it. So if we see someone using derogatory language, or we come across a process that acts as a barrier to participation for people affected by mental health problems, then making a point of calling those out and aiming to change those systems and processes that make it really difficult. So one of the things that we often hear from people who might be experiencing a mental health problem is that it's difficult to call those things out and to challenge those processes. It's pretty exhausting if you feel like you have to do that all the time. So the more that each of us in the community can take responsibility for making sure that our communities, that our workplaces are free from stigma and discrimination, the better. So on the 12th of October, Sane Australia, in partnership with our friends at the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences, launched our National Stigma Report Card. And that included responses from almost 2,000 people affected by complex mental health issues. And we looked at how stigma and discrimination affected people right across their lives, whether it was in their relationships with others, in employment, in education, in accessing income support, for example. And what we found is that, while we've made huge advances when it comes to better community understanding of issues like depression and anxiety, we still have an enormous way to go when it comes to more complex conditions like schizophrenia or personality disorder. Some of the areas where people told us that stigma and discrimination impacted their lives the most were in terms of their relationships with those closest to them, but also employment. So being able to feel safe in a workplace to share what might be going on in terms of their mental health and well-being was a real challenge for a lot of people. People feared being stigmatised or discriminated against. And so, we really feel that it's incredibly important that we're investing efforts in destigmatising some of these more complex mental health conditions, which unfortunately are still quite poorly understood in the community. So as a result of the National Stigma Report Card, SANE's calling on the government to invest in a 10-year program of work to really eliminate stigma and discrimination towards people affected by complex mental health issues. We know that eliminating stigma is about much more than just more community awareness around mental health problems. It's actually about tackling the systems and processes that often act as barriers for people to participate in the community and to access the care and support that they need. So you can head to nationalstigmareportcard.com.au to read a little bit more about what we found and have a look at some of the recommendations that we've made to reduce stigma and discrimination in our community.
And thank you so much to Dr. Michelle Blanchard for joining me, or us, all of us. In fact, there are 123 of you joining us from across New South Wales, possibly from across Australia, possibly from internationally as well. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today on mental health in the workplace, particularly in the context of a pandemic, which raises all sorts of interesting questions and challenges and opportunities for having more of these sorts of conversations about mental health and our relationship to work. I should just say that Michelle is Deputy CEO of SANE Australia. And yes, do head to the National Stigma Report Card website. It is vital reading. I found it a real wake-up call, that document, and it's well worth looking at. So for our next panel, I'm excited to have with us three people, all who work in quite different contexts, but we're going to be talking about creating mentally healthy workplaces. And we really want to hear some living, breathing examples of how that happens and how workplaces, how managers, employers respond to some of the questions and challenges that were raised by our lived experience panel around stigma. And joining us, Emma Hogan, Secretary of the Department of Customer Service, with the New South Wales Government. Now, that's a massive department with lots of front-facing roles. After a long and diverse career in the private and corporate sector, Emma has recently been named as Ambassador for Safe Work New South Wales. We'll find out what that's all about, but essentially these selected people are designated as champions of change when it comes to mental health at work. They are going to be walking the talk and aiming to reduce stigma of mental health by tackling barriers and sharing their experiences too. Thank you for joining us, Emma. Great to have you. Thanks for making time.
Thanks for having me.
We have Johanna Franklin with us. She's project lead at Everymind. Everymind is an institute dedicated to delivering successful mental health and suicide prevention programs. They've been doing so for over a quarter of a century. Johanna leads a really special initiative out of Everymind called the Ahead for Business Project. Now, it's all about mental health and wellbeing support for small business owners across Australia. And I know if you are joining us from the small business industry, you are dealing with a lot of challenges and a lot of uncertainty right now. So thank you so much for making the time to be with us. And we hope that we can offer resources to support you through, this conversation, but also the work that Johanna is going to talk about. We have with us also Lainey Cassidy, who's Head of People Operations Mental Health at KPMG Australia. Thanks for joining us, Lainey. Lainey's focus is on developing leadership capability and mental health literacy across all levels of an organisation, big corporation. She's led the development of robust internal peer support networks and platforms for storytelling to really try and normalise conversations about mental health in the workplace. That's no mean feat in a large corporation, so I'm dying to hear about that. KPMG is also a founding member of a brand new alliance called the Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia, just launched this month, so we'll find out about that too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, just a reminder, please do post your questions because we'd love to weave them in as early as we can for our panel. Love your thoughts from each of you on what challenge you think COVID-19, the moment that we're living through right now, this extraordinary historical moment presents for you in this conversation about mental health in the workplace. Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha, and thanks everyone for having me. Gosh, what a year it has been.
What a year.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about 2020. So I have a team of 10,000 people who primarily work either through Service New South Wales or Revenue New South Wales or in our regulatory teams like Fair Trading or Safe Work or CIRA or all manner of them. And so we had a really interesting time in that everybody who was customer facing needed to continue to be customer facing because they were considered and are considered essential workers, and everybody who worked in an office, which was probably over 5,000 people, suddenly had to work from home or work remotely. And one of the distinctions that I've learned to make this year is that we haven't asked everybody to work flexibly, we've asked everybody to work remotely, and they're two very different things. Yeah. And the reason that I mention that is because when it comes to mental health especially, I think that working remotely has provided some people with mental health benefits, and for others, because it hasn't been a flexible model, it has not provided mental health benefits and in fact has had quite the opposite response. So we've been sort of pulse surveying our workforce all the way along. And at the beginning, everyone was really united by this common why. Everybody wanted to beat COVID. Everyone was doing what it took. But now, more recently, we've got definitely a spectrum of responses of people who are feeling disconnected, don't necessarily want to come back to work full time, but do want to reconnect with humans outside of their home. And I think people are finding it more and more difficult for their dining room table to also be their desk. And so we're now trying to work through how can we be better coming out of this when it comes to flexibility, and how do we actually consider mental health as a core pillar, I guess, of how we approach flexible working moving forward. I agree with the panel earlier. We have proven during this time that presenteeism is irrelevant and that we can be very productive. But I think every individual is different, just like the mental health of every individual is different, and accordingly we have to have an accordion of options, I think, to be able to accommodate mental health, and never has that been more proven than this year.
Yeah, and I don't know how you even fathom doing that when you've got 10,000 staff. It's just beyond my capacity to even imagine that. But what does it mean to take a pulse survey? I think people will find that interesting to know. How do you have connected in?
Yeah, so we asked everybody at the beginning, or not at the beginning, in April and again in August, how do you think we're supporting you with COVID? Are we doing the right things? Do you need more from us, less from us? What's impacting you the most? And we were able to sort of manage our progress and manage the difference between how people were feeling in April versus how people are feeling in August, and we're just doing another one now. We've also done, lots of conversations. Team leaders have really stepped up and talked to their people a lot more. And the attitude has changed from the beginning of, people doing what we were calling quarantinis or drinks on a Teams meeting on Friday to being quite different now. The novelty's worn off. We're definitely into a more regular operational business rhythm. And for some, that's been really positive, and for others, not so much. So we're just monitoring the sentiment by asking our people how they're feeling and making sure we action what they tell us.
That's the challenge, isn't it? And we'll come to that. But you can get all that data, and then it's what you do with it, and feeling capable as an employer to know what to do with that information, that data. Johanna Franklin, you engage with the small business sector. Now, they are experiencing unique challenges at the moment. Many of their businesses have had to be put on hold. Some have even fallen over. And I wonder how you see the present moment in terms of the scale of the support that's going to be needed for small business employees and employers.
Thanks, Natasha. I think one really important thing to note and acknowledge for small businesses, COVID's been huge, but this isn't the only adverse event they've faced this year and last year. So, we've come out of a very intense bushfire season. Lots of small business haven't recovered from that, and COVID has hit. So on top of that recovery, and they've got the prospect of now going into another bushfire season if they're in bushfire affected areas, whether it's that or drought, floods, that kind of thing. So it's tough. They haven't caught a break. And so I think for small business owners and people they employ and their families are often really affected, because small business is so ingrained, and family and friends, it's been very tough for them. And I think one of the things that we hear so much this year, probably people have heard enough of, the word self-care, but it's so important. And for small business owners, mental health in the workplace often starts on an individual level. So really trying to put time aside to do the things that protect them from mental ill health. So whether it's going for a walk once a week or reading a book, that's the kind of thing that we encourage, and the work we're doing with Ahead for Business is planning that time for self-care and really setting up those protective factors. I think isolation was mentioned a lot in the first panel, and it's another huge thing for small business, whether they're working physically alone or just the burden of all the responsibilities they have to take on. Often they're doing the finance, doing the marketing, being the HR department. I think that mental load can also really make you feel isolated if you don't have lots of colleagues to kind of share and be supported. So, really
in some sense, Emma talking about that distinction between working flexibly and working remotely, I think small business owners often live this reality full-time. They're running a business from their kitchen table. It never leaves their psyche. Their work role is who they are in its entirety, isn't it? And that presents some real challenges for our mental health and our self-conception.
Yeah, absolutely. And another important thing to note is, this happens in larger workplaces too, but not all small business can adapt and pivot in this really difficult time. If you're desk-based, yes, maybe you can work from home, but your local butcher, they're different. They can't kind of adapt, and really there's not a lot of options for them. So, just starting at that individual level of looking after themselves, the messaging that, a healthy business owner will allow you to support your staff if you have them and let your business thrive. So it's tough for them, but there's lots of stuff out there. And definitely, just lastly to mention, from when we started this project 3 years ago, the mental health and wellbeing awareness and support for small business has come so far. There's a long way to go, but we've really gone a long way across the whole sector. So that's a real positive.
Yes, and I absolutely want to hear some of the specifics in the Ahead for Business and a project that you've been running. If you are joining us, we would now love to have your questions pouring in to the portal that I've got just over here on the side screen, and I'd love to be able to see your questions for our panel and weave them in along the way. So don't hold back. Feel welcome to participate. Lainey Cassidy at KPMG, you're in a big corporate, and that presents its own unique challenges, doesn't it, in terms of how you respond to the mental health needs of your workforce. Lots of people are racing to meet their KPIs. There's corporate pressure. Like every workplace that we're talking about here have interesting crossovers, but there are some unique aspects to working inside the corporate sector as well, aren't there?
Absolutely, and I think we saw that more than ever when COVID hit and we all had to work remotely and work from home, and particularly we pulsed along the way just to check in and see how our people were doing, and one of the key things that we did hear was that people were exhausted, and I think that comes from obviously the fatigue of the pandemic, but in a high performance culture you've got individuals that are just going and going and going. And I think for KPMG and the discussion that we're now having is, as we move into our new reality across different ways of working and carving out our different working hubs. So we've got our 3 working hub model that we're working through, which is home, office and client. But I think as we do that, particularly being from home and that remote working, it's really important that we give permission and empower our people to establish daily habits, rituals and behaviours that really support not just balance but also recovery, self-regulation and routine, and really doing, that placing that emphasis on the power of switching off. In a high-performance culture in a corporate, I think that sometimes we're our own worst enemies and we will just keep going. And so we're really focusing on that side of the things to create that culture and permission for people to not just keep going when they are working from the home hub. So that's something we really saw across COVID.
Yes, I'd love to just follow up on that though, because how important, Emma might relate to this too, how important is what messages leadership give in this situation? And it came up in the first panel too, it's in terms of switching off. It's also in terms of how vulnerable do they let themselves be to initiate conversations. How do you build also a culture of trust, not just at a time like this, but more broadly, that allow people to articulate that they're having mental health challenges, but not feel like they're going to lose their job or somehow be held back from career progress because of stigmatising attitudes about what mental health means?
Absolutely. That's a big question, but a great question.
Yeah.
I think inclusive leadership is really important, and leadership vulnerability. And I think naturally you saw that come out across the pandemic, but it does help show that our leaders are humans. And one of the things that we heard from our people as well from those pulse surveys was it was just really wonderful to see my leader in their home as a human. And I think the natural organic thing that happened with COVID was we all come into each other's houses and we were forced to do that and realise, hey, we're all humans and we are all here to feel as well. So I think that was the silver lining with COVID, in that there were those work barriers that kind of stripped down. The other thing is storytelling, I think is really important, because that goes back to leadership vulnerability, and something we've started our journey on a little while ago at KPMG was sharing stories of not just lived experience, but just how people thrive and stay well. But I think the lived experience really resonated with people to get comfortable to say, well, my leader, might not have always had it together, so it's okay, and it's okay for me to not be okay, and I can still be brilliant, and that was really important, that storytelling piece. So,
so you have a mental health peer support network at a KPMG, I gather. Now, what does that look like? What is that about, and is it a safe place? Do people participate?
One of the first things that we were really intentional of not calling it was a mental health first aid network. And the reason for that is because that acronym or that word implies that they're needing to be fixed. And we just completely were against that. Initially, when we built the program a few years ago, it essentially was a program that sat in HR, and I'd probably sit here a few years ago and say, I'm not sure it was really well utilised because it was an HR thing. So one of the things that we wanted to do was expand and scale and really have a true peer support program, so that when individuals come into work, they had their peer that was also their friend, but also their colleague that was equipped to be able to talk to them and lean in and engage and and also recognise when they might not be doing that well. So it is a safe space. It's certainly an evolved program from where it was a few years ago, and I think that's because it's a true peer-to-peer support program now, and it's across all levels of the organisation. So we've got our graduates that sit in the program, or the network we call it, up to our partnership, and that goes back to that leadership commitment and leaders demonstrating that they're really involved in supporting our people. In addition to that, our programs, bridge across, and I think, part of what we've done across our initiatives is take out the technical element of our training, because I think somewhere along the way we lost that human element of, so we just actually need to feel comfortable to have a conversation, and so our leaders have gone through some really organic and different training around how to have a mental health conversation. So I think, to your point earlier around feeling comfortable to disclose, by equipping our leaders to let them know that they don't need technical training to actually connect and care, has been a big part of the shift in focus around stigma reduction and breaking down those barriers.
It's very interesting. We've had a question from, I think it's Chloe, love to support persons with mental health issues. Most of the time, though, don't know the full story and worry about saying or acting wrongly and making the situation worse. Managers would not tell, can't ask the person direct, therefore have been avoiding persons with issues and leave them alone. How can we help? Emma, I might come to you on that one. I think that's a great question because it embodies so much, doesn't it? I also will come to you on the point that Lainey made about, it was just an HR thing, so people didn't really take it on. Because I think that lack of, there's a lot of kind of desire to want to do something and brand it in a corporate way or a departmental way. Have your ROK cupcakes and Are You OK Day cupcakes and, but the reality is that some of the workplaces that do that are quite toxic or undergoing dreadful stress, redundancies, etc. So let's come to that secondary. But that point about how do you start having a conversation without treading on someone's toes?
Well, I might do it in reverse and come back to Chloe's question.
Good.
So I've had my own what I call a dance with my own mental health. And when I very first started as the secretary, we did this in conversation with the secretary so the team could get to know me. And I explained my story and why mental health was important to me and the dance that I have had with it. And just in doing that, even though I don't always love to tell that story, I know when you're in a position of power, and no matter how down to earth I try to be, with the secretary title comes this, perception or reality of power. And so I know by telling those stories in leadership positions, it gives other people permission to do the same, but it also sets the expectation, not that I want all of my leaders to tell stories they're not comfortable with, but it is my expectation that we have an open environment where people feel free to speak up, and mostly and most importantly, and this is to Chloe's point, is to feel free to learn. So I think Camille and Tim and Luke talked about it earlier. You can't go and study this and be really and wait till you're perfect and get all your certificates and then come out and say, okay, I'm ready to help anybody who has a mental health challenge. I'm good now. I think
your mental health first aid certificate framed up behind your desk, yeah.
So, but I think if you genuinely approach people with empathy and you genuinely let people know that you're here to talk, you're here to help, and even if you don't have the answers, you'll help the person try and find the right person to get the answers. To me, that's a culture I really want to create. So one of our cultural pillars is people and inclusion at the heart. And for me, mental health really falls into the inclusion component of the way in which we work. How can anybody be their best selves at work if they don't feel included? And if there's a stigma around mental health, then they can't form part of that. And that includes me. And I'm the most senior leader. So it takes a lot of work. 10,000 people, you don't just turn up and say, we're all going to be accepting overnight. It takes role modelling, it takes walking the talk, it takes learning, it takes admitting mistakes and saying, you know what, I tried to help someone the other day and I did this and I realised later I shouldn't have, and I just want to share that experience with everybody else. And if we can create a culture where it's just okay to talk, share and learn, as long as you have authenticity in that, I think you can only get better and better. Now, to the other equation, it is a fine line because you don't want to tread into territory that you're not equipped to deal with. So what I'm trying to challenge my leaders to think about
what's performance management and what's compassionate management. You know, there is a fine line there when it comes to mental health and wellbeing. And managers really struggle with that. Okay, is someone underperforming? What do I do with this? You know,
that's true. But I think we have to ask human questions. Are you okay? Is not something we should ask once a year. That's something we should be asking all the time. If someone's normally usually a really good performer that suddenly seem to be struggling or regularly late or just off, I would be encouraging our leaders not to go straight to a performance conversation, but go to an are you okay conversation. Now, like I said, I don't get to turn up and wave a magic wand and 10,000 people know how to do that, but it is certainly a culture we're trying to create. We're trying to learn from each other, and we're trying to learn from other organisations. And, you know, Camille is on, who you met earlier, is on Lived Experience Advisory Council, and we talk to those guys a lot to say, you know, are we going down the right path here? Would this make sense to you? And I think just by learning and exploring opportunities and talking to people who've done great work in this space, we can only get better for it. And we won't get it right 100% of the time, but I think if we're trying, it's a move in the right direction.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point as well around, just before you go into thinking that somebody's an underperformer, really trying to understand what's going on for that person is the first thing that you should be doing. So I completely agree with that comment.
Johanna Franklin, the interesting context, I mean, let's climb inside the small business space where you're working and have developed this portal of resources to help guide people through these conversations. In a small business, you might be a sole trader, so you are your colleague, or it's a moving cast of colleagues in terms of your clients, perhaps. Or alternatively, it might be a family business that you've grown into from childhood, and now you have to take the reins from dad or mum. You know, these conversations take on a whole other dynamic in those sorts of environments, don't they?
Yeah, I think definitely. And you know, small business, as you mentioned, they're so ingrained within family and friends network. And if you work in a more rural area, you know, your GP might be your next door neighbour or your next door neighbour's wife, and you're worried.
Or a client.
Exactly, or a client. So it's even hard, or it might even be harder to have those conversations. That for the business owner, and then, you know, you might have one employee, you might work with that employee every single day, have a very professional relationship, and although you spend all your time together, you might not feel that that's the person you want to talk to. So I think just jumping on the back of having those conversations, if you have noticed that your is maybe different, you know, coming in late, Emma mentioned things like that, it's good also to say, you know, I've noticed you know, is everything okay? And if they seem to not want to talk to you, it's good to say, is there someone you want to talk to? Because I think in that small business arena, it's just offering alternatives. And it's really, it's difficult when it's such a closed kind of network. And
indeed, the family may be the trigger for your mental health challenges, and you're working alongside them in the very business that you're running together. So very, very difficult how to disclose that you're having a challenge in that situation. On the other hand, you know, big corporations have employment assistance programs sort of contracted in to provide independent counselling or therapy support for employers, confidential. So how do you work with small businesses to encourage them to seek other resources for their staff or for themselves?
Yeah, great point. So our Ahead for Business digital hub has a lot of stuff. It's totally free. A lot of information for small business, how, whether it's an established small business, someone starting out, or if it's someone who is a family member and thinks that their partner who runs a small business is struggling. There's a lot of information, tools, resources that they can look at just to get started on that journey to identifying a mental health issue. There's a directory of specific small business support, and there's a business stressor screen. So just a really quick 2-minute screen. Small business owners can use it to identify the main stresses that they're facing. We have a mental health checkup too, and if the checkup results identify that the person is struggling with a mental health issue, we provide a pre-populated letter for a GP. So it's just a way to start that really difficult conversation for small business in a hope that they'll make those steps. Yeah, something really practical. There's loads of other stuff out there, the Beyond Blue COVID-19 helpline for everyone, but they have the Heads Up website too. So there's loads of resources, free training programs.
But how do you reach the people that need to know this? Because if you're stuck in the mud of your own reality running a small business, you're not necessarily going to go onto Google and go, help, are you?
Yeah, it's such a great point. I think one part of Ahead for Business, because it's much bigger than the digital hub, is really getting it ingrained in those communities. So getting the people that work with small business, so intermediaries, most small business should have a financial advisor, an accountant, and legal support, insurance, those kind of things. That's a really good way to get into kind of infiltrate the small business community, and that the centers and almost as well, where peak bodies that small business are part of. So again, it's that messaging about mental health knowledge, decreasing stigma, but that there's support there.
Yeah, and I think that it's also about, spreading the word about the port, aheadforbusiness.org.au, aheadforbusiness.org.au. It's as much as, I've found during lockdown Melbourne, during this COVID period, every small business that I frequent who happens to be open or still providing services, I do ask them the question. I talk to them about their reality in the moment of that transaction, so that they do know that there's a wider community around them, and that's so vital. Hey, I'm going to throw some questions into the mix from our audience, and thanks so much for posting them. It's great to see them coming in. I'll read parts of Kay's question because I think it's salient to the time that we're in. Kay asks, I went through a prolonged traumatic experience during the bushfires earlier this year. When I returned to work, I asked my manager if I could initially return on reduced hours as I was physically exhausted. My manager denied this request, saying that it would make things too difficult for the team. So I pushed on, even though I was very depleted. Along with bushfire recovery and COVID, I've since gone on to experience a year of never-ending restructures, job instability, unrealistic deadlines and workloads, and this has put me at greater risk of mental health difficulties than indeed the actual traumatic experience of the bushfires. Managers need to listen to staff and consider preserving mental wellbeing before a person is in crisis. I've prioritised taking these steps myself, but it's come at a cost of my loyalty and commitment to the organisation, so the employer has lost out. How can we make employers listen and support us when we're trying to be proactive about protecting our mental wellbeing? I read all of that because I think it encapsulates so much about our modern working realities. But that idea of loss of loyalty and commitment, this is an issue of that, isn't it? Lainey or Emma or Johanna, who would like to take that on?
I think I'm happy to start, but more go back to, thank you for sharing that example, and sorry that you had to go through that. That would have been really difficult. I think part of it comes back to leadership capability, and as a large corporation, it's really important that we empower and equip our leaders to be human first, and that's really important. And when individuals disclose or they feel comfortable to share or a kind of appoint their needs, then that if they can't get a response that's going to be supportive, that's just really going to kill culture and what needs to be a mentally healthy workplace. So I think, the real important part is, not just for us at KPMG, but as a corporation, it's just having a conversation and leaders having that conversation with individuals to listen first and really just understand what's going on for that person versus I've got to manage all of these clients, or I've got all of these deadlines, and naturally that is what plays out in the mind by default. But even if that is the natural, fighting that and saying human first, listen, because then if you listen, then you can understand and try and help.
But then I'd say, Emma, I'm feeling for those middle managers who kind of are getting it from high on and getting it from, their staff. It's a tough one to navigate. And Lisa's written, as an employee, how does the panel recommend initiating change in organisations where there is a culture of the "Are you okay?" cupcakes and yet a toxic reality in inauthenticity? And Nellie writes in a related way, I recently opened up to my employer about my anxiety, which felt good, but they only listened. They did not respond with any words of support nor express any understanding. All they said was, keep us in the loop on your anxiety. How can I direct my employer to use some tools?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because if I take it back to the scenario I was talking to before, we've got 10,000 people. So you can imagine at least probably 2,000 of those are people leaders in some way, shape or form, whether they're a team leader in a service centre or a call centre, all the way through to senior executives. And it requires not just an education but a willingness. Not everybody is naturally empathetic. Again, people often freeze if someone opens up and it's an issue they've not dealt with before. They're not sure what to do or what to say. So I think it is upon employers to kind of, create the culture that allows people to learn and grow, create the resources and training for leaders and managers, provide free direction to resources that are outside of the workplace. Safe Work has lots of those for people who don't feel comfortable talking to their leaders. And I do think it's going to be a continuous journey. And, some people might completely open up, but they don't want a response. They feel, well, just having been listened to. Others want a conversation. It's a very tricky dance, but I think it can only be met with empathy, learning and understanding. And also, to be really honest with you, there's only so much we can achieve unless you have a CEO or a boss who's truly on board and truly supportive of allowing this culture all the way through the organisation. Otherwise, you might have a great team locally, but if you sort of move outside of that, you might not get the same outcome. So that would be my advice.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, but I have a 3:30 speaking engagement and we're running a bit over. And
thank you. I'm going to let you go.
My audience waiting and I have to jump off.
No, that's so okay. Sorry, and thank you so much, Emma Hogan.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma. And we'll round off here too. Thanks, Emma, so much. That's Emma Hogan, Secretary for the Department of Customer Service, 10,000 staff. I just want to also round off with you, Johanna. For people in small business who are feeling the pressure and assuming that that's just the pressure of small business, the reality of small business is high pressure. How do they recognise, where would you advise that they start to think about recognising when they're tipping over?
Yeah, I think, look, like you said, there's really unique challenges for small business. So we've mentioned isolation, cash flow, managing staff if they do. And we're a prevention organisation, so we bang the prevention drum constantly. But it's really it's just setting up those structures when you can find the time. We have a wellbeing plan, and it's things for Lee. Those things are the things that protect you when times get really tough, setting up your networks. So, you know, you're going to go through periods of stress, and then things might settle a bit, and then especially now it might be prolonged. So, yeah, jump onto Ahead for Business. There's lots of stuff that can support you. It's those first steps. Jump on, have a little look, come back off, digest, and then go back on, and you can register and track your progress. So, yeah, it's tough, but there is a lot of support for small business.
And thank you so much for getting the word out about Ahead for Business. Lainey, final comment to you about what you'd like to see in the corporate sphere, because, of course, you're involved in this national alliance now, linking up different big workplaces to try and build a conversation around mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I share the sentiment. There's more to learn, and corporations have done a bit, but I think that they've just scratched the surface. And I think that that's the power of the Alliance, in that it's business-led but expert-guided, and 15 founding members and participants so far. We've also got a website, but in terms of the structure, it's deep level of engagement, and how that plays out in an organisation is there are board members of the Alliance that are CEOs of corporations, so it's a boardroom conversation, and then founding members like myself that represent the organisation, so it's a boardroom discussion and commitment.
So this is the Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia, brand new.
Correct, launched last week. So, you know, the power of the Alliance is businesses, big businesses, but medium and small, coming together across the board collectively to talk about this and share what we're doing, and just really have that conversation around, you know, creating mentally healthy workplaces, what that means, sharing and learning together. It's never been more powerful, I think, to actually even have competitors come together and share what we're doing so that we can learn from each other. So really, really powerful. And if I could use the words from the CMHA UK Global Ambassador and CEO, Poppy, she quoted this on the launch last week: we have to be radical and relentless in our expectation of ourselves, of our communities, and of our workplaces to be better on mental health. And I think that that's what our North Star is at Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'd love to thank you both, and I've thanked Emma at the Department of Customer Service in New South Wales, but Lainey Cassidy from KPMG, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Johanna Franklin from Everymind and the project Ahead for Business, thank you so much for joining us and your support of small businesses across Australia.
Thanks, Natasha.
Fantastic. And thank you for all your questions that have come in too. Really appreciate it. And they're really beautifully open and frank and honest. Now, we're just going to wrap the event with a very short video from Georgie Hartigan. She's a senior peer support worker from the Being Warm line. Or the Being Warm line. And she's going to talk about how it supports people experiencing mental health challenges as peers supporting peers. And then I'll just be back with you at the very end to wrap the event and share some resources with you.
Being supported is a warm line service for anyone in New South Wales who's looking for someone to talk to and connect with. You know, what's unique about our service is that we are peer-based and peer-run. Basically what that means is when you call through to us, you'll be speaking to somebody who has lived experience. And we've found that a lot of the people that we support find it very helpful to be talking to someone who, you know, gets it and understands what they're going through. So we operate 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. One of the main focuses of our calls is social isolation and loneliness. And I think we all know how detrimental loneliness can be for people's mental wellness as well as their physical health. So we try to provide a safe space in which people can discuss those issues that they're having. And obviously this has kind of become more of an issue during COVID pandemic when people are more physically isolated. So it's basically just about, providing that safe space and trying to, you know, work through some of those concerns or issues that are facing them. as well as providing relevant, referrals when we see fit as well. Rather than giving advice, we kind of just try to hold that space of hope, and provide that time on the phone with people to really express what's happening with them. Obviously, there's been a lot of employment loss during COVID, and that's caused some serious concerns and issues for the people that we're supporting. One of those things is a lot of people have lost their social support network as well as their actual employment. That includes a lot of the people that call us have support workers, and if they're sick, they can't attend, and that's causing a lot more isolation as well. So we just try to provide some coping strategies to get through that time, as well as I mentioned before, providing referrals when necessary. So they could be for other phone lines, crisis phone lines, as well as just local community activities or groups that might be in their area as well. So my story of becoming a peer worker is I was quite heavily involved in youth mental health in the LGBTIQ plus space, and being able to provide that kind of lived experience that I had with the young people I was supporting. It really showed me, the value and the importance of what we're doing here, and being able to provide, that understanding, that empathy, and that non-judgmental space. And that's the kind of thing that I wish that my younger self had access to when I was dealing with my own mental health issues. In terms of how to become a peer worker, I know the MHCC run a course, the Cert 4 in peer support, and there's also a lot of other training and courses that you can do on top of that to really expand that skill set.
Thank you so much to Georgie Hartigan. Georgie works at the Being Supported Mental Health Peer Support Line as a senior support specialist. And I'll give that number out actually because I think that's a useful resource, 1800 151 151. That's the Being Supported Mental Health Peer Support Line. So that's where people can get access to peer workers who are familiar with the experience of mental illness and can support you or put you onto other resources that they think you might find useful. And also relevant to today's discussion, another resource, the Beyond Blue Coronavirus Mental Wellbeing Support Service. That's 1800 512 348, the 1800 512 348, but you can get to that from the Beyond Blue website. Now, we're going to scroll some other resources for you as a PowerPoint slideshow just to round off the discussion. This event was recorded. You can share it with others by using the link that you used to access today's event. The New South Wales Mental Health Commission thanks you for joining us today. My name is Natasha Mitchell. They would love to hear your feedback about the speakers you've heard today and about the event to help them inform future events like this one. And stay well, look after each other. We're going through an interesting time. It's been my great delight to chair this session for you. Take care today and have a great weekend.